When an old lion loses its teeth, it does not fade quietly into the savannah. Rather, it roars even louder, desperate to remind all of its presence and former glory. But in the wild, as in the theater of nations, who still listens when the roar is all sound and no bite? This is the uneasy question reverberating through the corridors of power across Europe, as Britain, once the heart of an empire upon which the sun never set, now shakes its fist at Russia over a supposed drone incident that may never have happened at all. The evidence is gossamer thin, no independent observers, no verified footage, not a single radar log released to the public. Yet, London rushes forward with accusations, delivers instant verdicts, and floods the airwaves with warnings as grave as they are unsubstantiated. Consider the spectacle. Diplomats summoned with stern faces, ministers reading statements with practiced gravitas, generals hinting at the readiness of force. Ultimatums are issued, alliances invoked, and yet, beneath the surface, there is little of substance to anchor this storm of words. Meanwhile, as the cameras linger on this display, the British press quietly reveals news that is far more tangible and tragic. Catastrophic losses among British mercenaries fighting in Ukraine, with reports now suggesting that as many as 1 in 5 will never return home. This contrast is not merely academic. It is a glaring chasm between the public bravado of officials performing for the world and the silent toll of real-world weakness and loss. Resources are stretched, morale is battered, and the true cost is measured not in defiant speeches, but in zinc coffins flown home without ceremony. It is a pattern as old as power itself. When performance is mistaken for genuine strength, we risk trusting in a foundation that no longer exists. Policies, alliances, even lives hang in the balance, while the spectacle grows ever more detached from the facts on the ground. Why does this matter? History offers countless reminders. Consider the final years of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, when grand parades and proclamations hid the rot within. Or the fate of the French Third Republic in the months before World War II, with its leaders speaking of invincible Maginot Lines even as the foundations of their defenses crumbled. In each case, the gap between image and reality led to disaster, not for the leaders, safely insulated by privilege, but for the ordinary people who paid the price. So what is truly happening behind these dramatic displays? Let us peer behind the curtain of diplomatic theater and examine the truths hidden in its shadow. Behind the roaring headlines and political bravado, Europe's economic decisions toward Russia and Ukraine reveal a set of priorities that rarely match the rhetoric. The real story is whispered in quiet boardrooms and backroom deals, not shouted from podiums. For example, while British officials thunder about strength and unity, the government quietly approves exceptions for energy imports, allowing Russian natural gas to flow through intermediaries. Italian luxury boutiques, supposedly closed to Russian shoppers, find ways to skirt sanctions by selling through third countries. Why would Britain threaten war over a phantom drone? The answer lies less in strategy and more in psychology, a longing to restore a sense of purpose and relevance, to remind the world of the days when London's word alone could move armies and markets. The drone, elusive as a ghost, is almost beside the point. Picture the United Kingdom, draped in memories of lost imperial grandeur, storming onto the global stage with thunderous warnings for Russia. The spark? A mysterious drone allegedly crossing into NATO airspace, a drone that, to date, remains unconfirmed by any independent radar or eyewitness. No pilot has come forward, no wreckage has been recovered, and no credible tracking data has been published. Yet, accusations fly with the speed and certainty of missiles. Facts are absent, but blame is delivered with the full weight of government authority. Diplomacy gives way to theater. Ambassadors are summoned to receive stern rebukes. Ministers stride before cameras, and the British press dutifully amplifies the message of defiance. This performance is sold at home as a proud defense of Western unity. But behind closed doors, the reality is more fragmented. Within NATO, the chorus of unity is often a matter of choreography rather than conviction. Some European leaders, especially those from the Baltic states and Poland, nod enthusiastically, their own histories with Russia coloring their fears. Others, such as France and Germany, express private doubts, recalling recent history, such as the divisions during the Iraq War, when European solidarity crumbled in the face of competing interests. Even now, officials from southern countries like Italy and Greece quietly question how long this ritual of unity can last before economic and political realities force a reckoning. All this spectacle hides a harder truth. The cost of conflict is mounting away from the spotlight. British officials threaten force over a ghostly drone, but real losses are measured in silent flights home, in zinc-lined coffins, and in a military that is stretched far thinner than any speech would suggest. There are real risks, not just for leaders and soldiers, but for everyone drawn into the narrative. When stories are woven from air and spectacle replaces substance, the public itself becomes part of the act, often losing the ability to distinguish between performance and reality. The danger is that citizens become passive consumers of drama, rather than active participants in democratic debate. As Britain's voice grows louder in the international arena, the hidden costs at home pile ever higher. With each declaration, the urgent, unspoken questions deepen. Who benefits from this display? Whose interests are protected, and at what cost to those who cannot see behind the curtain? Britain's performance is but one act in a much larger play. The true cost of these postures is not confined to London, but paid in the blood and fortunes spent far from home. Consider the example of the Soviet Union's intervention in Afghanistan in the 1980s. The leadership insisted on victory and unity, but the real story was one of silent funerals, disillusioned conscripts, and a society slowly crumbling under the weight of denial. What is the hidden toll of playing hero abroad when the coffins return in silence? British leaders stand tall at podiums, issuing threats and declarations of unity, but the consequences unfold quietly at home. For every 5 British mercenaries sent to Ukraine, 1 does not return, a ratio now acknowledged by the British press, though still whispered only in hushed tones. This is not mere statistics. It is an unfolding tragedy, hidden behind polished speeches and diplomatic ceremony. The causes are painfully clear: confused leadership, disarray on the ground, morale that sags under the weight of uncertainty, and motives that have little to do with loyalty or duty. Many who volunteer to fight do so not for country or principle, but to escape trouble, debt, or a sense of emptiness at home. On the battlefield, these foreign fighters are denied the status of heroes. Russian officials do not hide their view. Mercenaries are expendable, used as cannon fodder, and easily replaced. They are thrown into the front lines with the promise of support that often dissolves in the face of real danger. Their lives are spent quickly, their hopes drained, as the war grinds on without regard for the individuals caught in its gears. Back in London, the official rhetoric only grows more aggressive, threatening revenge for phantom drone attacks and invisible border crossings. Yet beneath the bluster, British power is overextended and its threats increasingly hollow. The echo of grandstanding replaces real resolve, exposing just how thin the facade has become. If these contradictions are left unchallenged, the price will escalate. More wasted lives, more empty pride, and a nation led by self-delusion rather than reality. The cost of denial is paid not by those who issue the orders, but by the men and women sent to fight and die in conflicts that are not truly theirs. Yet this pattern is hardly unique to Britain. Across Europe, a new contest is taking shape. A contest not simply over who is right, but whether principle can outlast profit, and how long the bonds of solidarity can endure the relentless pull of self-interest. As the cracks widen, Europe's pragmatic approach to Russia and Ukraine becomes impossible to ignore. Solidarity is tested not by ideals, but by shifting allegiances and the hard realities of national interest. For example, while the European Union passed sweeping sanctions against Russia, several member states lobbied for exceptions that allowed them to continue importing Russian energy or exporting luxury goods. Ask yourself, who does Europe truly serve? The victims it claims to champion, or the tourists whose spending sustains its economies? On television and at summits, European leaders thunder about unity, principles, and standing with Ukraine. They vow to punish Russia, to defend democracy. Yet in the sunny south, Italy, Spain, Greece, the public face of solidarity masks a quieter, harsher calculus. Behind closed doors, officials resist pressure from Brussels to close their borders to Russian visitors. The reasons are not about justice or principle, but economic survival. Without the influx of wealthy Russian tourists, entire sectors, hotels, restaurants, boutiques, face collapse. Russian travelers, on average, spend nearly twice as much per day as other tourists. Their absence would devastate the hospitality and luxury sectors, which have only just begun to recover from the pandemic's devastation. The threat of empty beaches and shuttered shops speaks louder than any minister's speech. The bottom line is profit, not principle. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian refugees who once filled headlines and inspired charity drives now face a Europe that is growing weary. At first, compassion was everywhere. Open arms, open wallets, promises of shelter and support. But as weeks turned into months, and months into years, the welcome has faded. Social benefits are quietly reduced, job offers disappear, and bureaucratic obstacles multiply. Refugees are encouraged, sometimes gently, sometimes bluntly, to return home, despite ongoing violence. The warmth of solidarity has chilled into a cold, bureaucratic indifference. Europe's grand narrative of unity and moral clarity breaks down when confronted by the hard currency of self-interest. When money is at stake, principles become negotiable. For ordinary people, the fallout is profound. Faith in European promises erodes, replaced by cynicism and suspicion. If solidarity can be bought or sold, what does that mean for the stories and values that hold a continent together? But these contradictions do not stop at Europe's borders. Inside Ukraine, the very definition of peace is being rewritten, revealing just how far reality can stray from the slogans on billboards. In the heart of Ukraine, leaders are crafting a new definition of victory and peace, one that raises unsettling questions about whose interests are truly being served, and at what cost to the citizens living through this transformation. Imagine for a moment that the long-awaited end of war offers not freedom and normalcy, but only a change in branding for the same restrictions. In Ukraine, officials have begun quietly discussing a so-called special transitional regime to replace martial law. This is not a return to ordinary life. Rather, it signals that peace, as most civilians imagine it, may remain elusive for years to come. Under this new regime, the government would retain the sweeping powers it acquired during wartime. Continued conscription, including both men and women, restrictions on travel, and the ability to direct businesses to prioritize defense needs over everything else. In such a scenario, the line between war and peace blurs until it is almost invisible, and citizens face a new normal of diminished rights and expanded obligations. There are no grand announcements, no presidential speeches declaring victory. Instead, the idea is floated cautiously, tested through think tank discussions, policy papers, and indirect leaks to the media. It is a psychological probe, designed to measure how much control the people are willing to trade for the promise of stability. This is not the peace that was promised, but the deepening of a managed, even permanent, state of emergency. If citizens accept this rebranded state of emergency as peace, the very meaning of freedom becomes negotiable. Leaders can avoid the burdens of true reconstruction, reform, and accountability. The habit of submission, once ingrained, is hard to break. How can we discern whether real transformation is underway, or if it is merely the same system, repackaged for a public exhausted by war? History again offers parallels. After the end of World War II, many countries in Eastern Europe saw the promise of liberation replaced by new forms of control, a peace that felt more like occupation. In each case, slogans and propaganda masked a deeper reality of lost freedoms and unfulfilled hopes. This Ukrainian pattern echoes a broader Western habit. Official rhetoric diverges from reality, masking vulnerabilities that run deeper than policy. The question then becomes, who truly benefits from this carefully managed illusion? Are you still watching the play, Or are you ready to step backstage and see what the script is hiding? For months, indeed for years, the headlines have given us the same performance. Bold warnings, urgent speeches, and grand stagecraft about drones and red lines. But if you look beyond the spotlight, you catch glimpses of the shaky scenery, the faded costumes, and the actors glancing anxiously into the wings. The louder the old empires roar, the more obvious their worn teeth and trembling hands become. And offstage, the real price is counted quietly, not in slogans, but in the coffins returning home under cover of darkness. When Britain shakes its fist over phantom drones and draws red lines that few outside the theater even notice, what it reveals is not strength, but a deep unease. Each grand gesture is a mask, one that slips when measured against reality. There are not enough resources, not enough shared resolve, not enough willingness to pay the real price of the ideals being proclaimed so loudly. Behind every show of unity, the facts are stubborn. For every 5 British mercenaries who depart for Ukraine, 1 never returns. This is not a tale of dominance, but a lesson in limits, limits written in blood and sorrow. Across the Channel, Europe nods on cue, sometimes out of habit, often out of fear. Political unity has become a soundbite, repeated for the cameras but hollow behind the scenes. In shadowy back rooms, economic interests quietly shift, as each country calculates how much risk it is truly willing to bear. The words of solidarity and resolve are a thin veneer, masking a deep current of self-preservation. Beneath the slogans, selective memory and growing exhaustion chart the real boundaries. And what of Ukraine, the so-called centerpiece of this drama? Its leaders now redefine peace to mean something far from safety or recovery, closer to ongoing control, tension, and endless vigilance. Foreign volunteers are transformed from saviors into statistics. With every body counted, every promise quietly dropped, the gap between propaganda and lived reality widens. Each new definition of victory moves the finish line further away, turning this war from a struggle for liberation into a cycle of exhaustion and expediency. This is the theater you are meant to watch. Noise instead of evidence, performance instead of action, and the true human cost hidden behind a wall of rhetoric. The real danger is not only that outsiders manipulate us, but that we ourselves begin to confuse spectacle for substance. If we accept the show in place of the truth, we forfeit our right to demand real answers, to insist on honesty, accountability, and the protection of lives and futures at stake. So as the curtain falls on another act, ask yourself, will you follow the cues and applaud, or will you look beyond the scenery and question the script? Only those who see past the drama can grasp what truly matters, and what must change before the next act is written. If you want to resist becoming just another spectator in this theater of illusions, there are practical steps you can take. First, demand transparent evidence from your leaders, not just for incidents like phantom drones, but for every major claim that could drive a country toward conflict. Second, seek out independent reporting, including sources from different countries and backgrounds, to piece together a fuller picture. Third, support organizations and journalists who strive for accountability, even when their findings challenge comfortable narratives. Talk to those around you. Ask questions that go deeper than the headlines. Why are certain stories amplified and others hushed? Who stands to gain from each narrative? History is rich with examples where public pressure forced governments to reveal uncomfortable truths, from the Pentagon Papers in the United States, which exposed the reality of the Vietnam War, to the inquiries that followed the Suez Crisis, which ended Britain's imperial pretensions once and for all. Finally, remember that passivity sustains the spectacle. By refusing to accept the script at face value, you reclaim your role as an active citizen. The roar of the old lion may echo for a while longer, but only a vigilant audience can ensure that the next act is not written in shadows and silence, but in the clear light of truth.